completely not diffused at all. So
that's perfect.
Get this.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Like the sun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have a special visitor here, Theo, as well. He loves our in the studio programming.
They look animated. It's almost fantastic.
So we're here. We're both in our separate apartments in Brooklyn, but Michelle is a Dominican, Puerto Rican, American artist from New Jersey originally that, I'll let her talk more about her work, but her work deals with migration, biculturalism, and we're excited to have you here today to talk about it. So the first work that I wanted to ask you about is the video Cueva Ventana, because I think it encapsulates so much of what you do, and especially even the title of the work, if you want to get started with that, and then maybe you can show some clips.
Yeah, I made the video. The video was sort of, I made a piece that was associated with the installation first. It was the sculptural piece in the entranceway of this installation. And it's called, oh my God, I'm so nervous.
Doing great.
Well, anyways, the sculpture piece I made as a result of the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And it was sort of the first time I'd experienced in my life sort of a disconnect from communication. It's the first time I had ever experienced not being able to call somebody or, find somebody on the internet just because they didn't have access to that. So there was a period of time where I didn't know what was happening with my family. And then all these other, my work's always dealt with my family history and just sort of grappling with sort of who I am. It's very autobiographical. It's not, it's not autobiographical. It has a lot to do with me, but I think in an extension, it's more so about who I am because my family sort of went before me, or like what they sort of went through to get me to the place where I am, where I'm living in America and sort of like dealing with what I'm dealing with. And so the piece came about, and it was sort of this sort of like delusional, childlike sort of attempt to sort of grapple with not having the means to communicate with them. And it's called Schematic for Solar Powered Elsewhere. And what it is basically it's this motherboard-esque type structure and a lot of objects are sort of arranged very sort of specifically to power the light source that then projects an image onto the wall. I think I have an image.
I actually think I can share an image so that you can talk about it.
Oh, cool.
You know what? It's actually not showing up for me. I had an issue with the ones that I downloaded, but you can show it from your end. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Where can I? Also, where is it? So. There we go. We're getting there. I'm getting there. Who's gonna get there first? Okay, I've got one. I guess I can turn this around. And if you guys can you see that? Is the light from the world getting in the way of that? Probably, right?
Okay, it's not terrible.
I should have less. Okay, there we go. So this piece is Schematic for Solar Powered Elsewhere, and that's the structure I was sort of talking about. It's sort of laid out really. It's kind of like sand play. If you ever heard of that in art therapy, they'll bring a child into a room and ask them to sort of collect a bunch of objects that are around them and sort of display them in a way that sort of is subconsciously, how they're basically asked to illustrate a scene. And I only heard about sand play after I made this. This sort of happened quite intuitively, and I did it. And it was sort of like my way of drawing. I had this board, and these are sort of objects that I've had in my studio for a long time that I'd been observing and writing about. And then when I started placing them, I realized, like it kind of looked like the inside of a computer chip, or it was like the inside of a machine. And everything was sort of for me, everything kind of powered the light source, which was the overhead projector. And the projection I chose is actually a spliced up image that I reconnected together. And it's the view from the inside of my grandmother's house in Puerto Rico looking outside. And so it was very, very much an homage to her being there. She passed away really soon after Hurricane Maria. And I think that this piece ended up being, although it was about me and me autobiographically, it also ended up becoming part about the female figures in my life, about my mother and my grandparents, my grandmothers in specific, and their lives and sort of the things that they had to go through to get to the ends of their lives. And then it also, in the process of doing that, I think dealing a lot with creating a mythology, creating a personal mythology about what it is to migrate and what it is to sort of start a life in a new country and to assimilate and to have two cultures that you're sort of dealing with at the same time, two languages, two forms of cuisine, two kinds of lives, two places. So I guess that's where I'll stop there, I guess, and explaining.
And the title of that work, Schematic for Colored Elsewhere, has a connection to the issues of power after Hurricane Maria, right?
Indeed, yeah, totally. And then the whole installation, Cueva Ventana, it's the name of this really beautiful tourist attraction in Arecibo, which is 2 towns over from where my family.
So I actually downloaded a picture of it so everyone can see.
It actually, and it has a cameo in the video, at the end of the video, that's part of this installation, where it sort of fades to green screen. The cave stays put, and the image of the horizon fades to green screen in the video. And I think that symbolically, it just means a lot to me. It's sort of a place that I've been to a few times growing up. Because even though, the great thing about Puerto Rico is that even locals really take a lot of pride in a lot of the tourism that happens there. So I was going a lot as a kid. I went like 4 or 5 times that I can remember, probably more so. But I was always struck by it as a place. It's sort of just like an overbearing metaphor, and I couldn't help but I needed to use it in some way. I needed to. The fact that it's a cave, it's called Cueva Ventana, which translates to windowed cave, which is clearly what it is. But I also was really fascinated by that that dichotomy that you have a cave with a window. And it's such a beautiful sort of simple metaphor that I think is what the whole installation is sort of dealing with.
Do you want to show some clips from the video for the viewers who haven't seen it?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can show the beginning. Ready? All right. Oh, that didn't work.
And these are Taino artifacts, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the video that's playing sort of inside of what I call my cave in the installation. And there I go.
I've imagined a few ways the world could end. The rites of passage of the human race seem to oscillate monotonously from history to clairvoyance. From the prestigious doors of the past to the uncertain ones of the future. A guess at what is likely to continue and what could possibly change becomes an experiment in prophecy. Characters favored by a world in entropy revolt, tend to organize their dreams in search of a primordial truth and descend unironically to the origins.
I suppose that's what we can stop there, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good taste of it. So do you want to talk about the audio and where the text comes from? I know there is a part that you wrote, but also there's a reference there.
Yeah, the text is a mixture. The voiceover is a combination of sort of this bastardized translation that I got from a Julio Cortázar sort of short story. I wouldn't even call it a short story. It was like a really short prose that he has in one of his books that's around the world in 80, around this book right here, Around the Day in 80 Worlds. And the story is called Toward a Speleology of the Domicile. And I remember I was reading the book about a year before I did the piece. And it kind of all came together pretty naturally, but the prose is sort of loosely about the feminine archetypes that men have. And also it's dealing with speleology, which is like the study of caves. And then he's relating it to the domicile. So he's relating it to his bedroom, to being like inside, to being, I think, inside of himself. And sort of the duality that's sort of present in that. So if you have his masculine and his feminine and his binaries. And I was thinking a lot about it and about when I was making this video because of the instance of the caves coming back into the work, and it made complete sense. And so what happened was that I took the story and I took the original Spanish version and had Google translate it into English. And what happened, I mean, it was a really, really poor translation. It's
Sure.
a really awful translation, actually, that made no sense at all, because translation is actually it's a really subtle, I think, art form that people don't realize takes a lot of effort, because, you know, when you're translating from one language to another, you have to do more than just translate a word to another word. You're trying to emote a feeling, and you're trying to translate like whole feelings. And so what I got were was just a clumping of words that I then took and used and sort of intertwined with my own words to make the voiceover for the video. Sort of creating like a new like a translated translation. It kind of took a few filters, but I was happy. And then towards the end, the video ends with a poem that I wrote. So it's got a little bit of everything inside of it.
Okay. And that translation is so interesting to me, these mediations that happen in your work, and in each of the works that we've looked at and will look at during this conversation, there's kind of a different form of that, whether it's translation or something with the media itself, like in the installation that we started with, the schematic for solar powered elsewhere, there's the projector and those different images that you compile. There's a comment from Sylvia here, you have to communicate sense when you're translating. I think that's a really smart comment. That's why Google can't translate for us always.
Yeah, I appreciate sort of the efforts. I mean, it's great for sort of small instances, but it's definitely not. I think that translators really deserve a lot of respect, like translators that are translating poetry, especially. You know, poetry and mythology are two of the hardest things to translate, I think, because it's so open. It's metaphoric, and it's so open to interpretation, in its essence. That I think that. And I also, I mean, in my work, I think I've always been struck by the technical definition of translation, which is just, it's basically the process of moving something from one place to another, which is I think the Webster definition of translation. So I mean, and I find that in a lot of my work, it's definitely about placement. I'm definitely taking something from one place and putting it somewhere else. So it's almost very literal in that way. But it's really interesting when you take that really literal definition and you can decide, well, if the definition of translation is to move one thing from one place to another, or to it's also, like, everything to move something from one medium to another, or some, just movement in that placement in that way, then it's allowed me, I think, sort of a structure that I use a lot. It's providing me with a structure that I often turn to when I'm making new work. So translation, I think, is definitely at the sort of base of everything.
Sure. And we can segue with that to your photo work, maybe starting with those first iPhone photograms, for lack of a better word, this kind of unique medium that you've come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think my background's in photography and video, and then I've sort of, I've moved into other forms of into other mediums. I've done sculpture and I've been doing some bookmaking, but I think I think the foundation of the ideas that I've worked with have always been based in photography, and I always find myself going back to the darkroom as sort of a base to start new projects. And what I have is the ones you were talking about is that I think a couple of years ago I started a series that I called Google Mirrors, and what they were basically stock images from the internet of mirrors. And what you get when somebody takes a photograph of a mirror is basically just and is trying to sell a mirror online is the frame, and then they always get a gradient placed in the center. So, because you can't translate reflection over the internet, right. Which I've found really interesting, that idea that you can't translate reflection the internet, which I think is what we're like so longing to do, is to be able to reflect ourselves in the internet or in new technologies. Especially now. So I thought it started as a joke and I wanted to make these tiny mirrors. And what I did was I took photographs of the mirrors on the internet with my phone. So I took the photograph of the mirror from the screen on my phone, and then I manually printed those images in the darkroom off of my phone. And what I ended up getting were these sort of like very, very beautiful, taking off of the computer screen. Oh, I don't know if you can you tell in that? Tell?
You can see it. And I know when I first saw this work, I laughed out loud. And you said you were glad I saw the humor in it because so many people took it so seriously. But to reproduce it on screen like that, there's a sense of humor.
Yeah, anything that's printed on silver gelatin archival paper in black and that's tiny like that, the references are so serious. It's like the references to the original photographs and and art history and photo history. Daguerreotypes and things like that, small, tiny things that are so precious, so expensive. And what I was doing, and what nobody knew when they were looking at them, was that I'd completely, the purity of what the darkroom is was actually completely sort of lopsided, because I'd taken the photograph with my iPhone and I had printed the image onto the paper with my iPhone. The light source was digital, the image was digital. The only thing that wasn't was the paper. And I think that was sort of, to me, what was the most fun, what was the funniest part of it.
And another form of translation.
Yeah. It was sort of like it was a digital translation of an analog historic process that I think is fascinating. If you can sort of, the fact that it's so pure and it's being interrupted by something that's so modern is something that I think is really interesting.
And you're working with that process still. One of the great things, one of the strange things about our time right now is we have these virtual studio visits and not all artists have access to their studio right now. But we're lucky that your studio is in your apartment, so you have some things that you can share with us.
I do. Yeah, my studio's in my apartment, although the work that I have up was from the darkroom, which I no longer have access to. But I did find, I am going to start, I ordered some solar fast, which is an exciting material, which is basically like it's sun printing. And I get this amazing sun in the studio, so I think I'll be able to print. But so I guess I can turn this around. Yeah. So I've got these. I don't know if you can, they're also, I work with a lot of small paper. I like things to be sort of the size of my phone, which is where it's being printed from. And I think otherwise, I mean, it wouldn't be obvious that I was printing off of my phone. And I do have some sort of larger works that I think are hilarious too, because that's about as big as it can go, being printed from my tiny phone. You know, it can get bigger than that. Right. But what they are vignettes, and they're also stock images of different kinds of transitions and just any, really, it's a mix of transitions, and there's also some solid photo work. There's the clouds that are sort of repetitive in my work. I also have a lot of repetitive imagery, the window, and then the mirror is back over there too. She makes an appearance from the original works. Yeah, and they all are based off of, I try to find images that I think are depictions of different kinds of memories. So, you know, like this one's repressed memory. And then I've got, you know, then there's, you know, like this one's like lucid dreaming or lucid memory. This one's photographic memory. So yeah, they don't get fixed. Some of them I think get fixed a little bit better than others. Like that's a crystal ball. And the fixing, you know, was so bad, but it was also so good. I really like it when those errors happen. And it kind of adds to sort of that magic of the crystal ball. But they don't get fixed because I think that's good, right? They don't get fixed because I really like the idea that they are always in a state of change. So, you know, they get printed, they get put on the paper, but the paper sort of acts like this mood ring where it's constant. I mean, I think it starts off and it's white, and then it becomes this like bluish purple, really beautiful bluish purple greens. And then at some point, this is sort of the later stages, it becomes a sort of like brown color. But I think knowing that at some point, I mean, they're not fixed. So they're, again, with sort of this archival process sort of being interrupted where it's no longer something, it becomes ephemeral more so than a photograph because the actual object isn't going to last very long, which I think is true to memories and to, you know, metaphors and just like thoughts.
Do you document that change at all to it, or no, it's just the object?
I'm notorious for not documenting. And I think that I do have a few, I would say that I'm not a prolific documenter, but I do have some images of what they look like in the beginning and at the end. But I think a lot of my work, for me, it's important that they live in this ephemeral way, in a way that I almost can't control. And if I document them, then I have to document things. So I do to an extent, but at some point I stop. But yeah.
And you mentioned that, oh, sorry.
No.
You had mentioned that you were working in a dark room that obviously we don't have access to right now. Do you want to talk about how your work has been changing with the current situation, or if this body of work is going anywhere besides its natural change right now?
Yeah, I am working on a new video, and that's sort of slowly going. It's a little hard. I mean, again, it's, I don't have enough, not much, I don't have enough equipment to do everything that I think I want to do, but I think it's always been an interesting exercise for me to work within like certain confines, both monetarily and spatially. And it's always been how I've worked. So I think that right now what I'm dealing with is, I was doing a little bit more darkroom work, but it's not necessary. I do have, like I said before, I'm going to do these sun prints. They're like cyanotypes, I guess, but solar fast, which is a this is getting into like nerdy, like material stuff.
No, it's interesting. I think it's interesting.
Jacquard is this brand that produces cyanotype materials. They also have this product called Solar Fast that comes in like an array of different colors, which I think is really interesting. And it's basically the same process. So it's you paint sort of the emulsion onto something, then place something on top of the emulsion and expose it to light, and then the image will be transferred onto the material that you've painted the emulsion onto. My plan is to do a series of those while I'm at home, with the sunlight that I get in my studio. Ideally, I would do one a day if I can build it up. I have this large banner of white fabric that I'm going to hopefully be doing this on, and the images are sort of they're an array of images. I don't always plan the things that the imagery and the objects that I use in my work. More so than not, it's the product of a lot of interneting. It's like I'm on the computer a lot, or I'm reading the news, and an image or an object in the world. It used to be that I would walk around a lot and I would see something in a 99-cent store or a vendor on the street, and something would sort of like I'd be drawn to it, and I'd get it and I'd use it in the work. Since I can't do that right now, I think I'm doing it more so with imagery. So those images that they're sort of like drawing me in are being saved in a folder, and I'm hoping that I can print them out and use them in this project. And then there's some smaller video things that I can do in my studio, sort of still life things that happen in a really small amount of space. There's a sort of larger aspect to the video that I'm working on that I would need more space for, but there's a lot.
Right. We're working with what we have. So one aspect of your practice that is interesting, talking about how we can't really go anywhere or travel, is the invisible doors. If you want to talk about that, I don't know if you'll be able to actually show us one or not, or if you can show us an image.
I have a picture of one. The invisible doors is I do have a lot of ongoing projects, I think. So these prints are one, and then these doors are another one. And I think that there's sort of ways that I can sort of travel with my work. I think that there's some times when I have really big ideas, and then I get a little overwhelmed, and I sort of feel like I have to back off for a little while to sort of take some space from it. And I think I always go back to these two projects, which is this Darkroom project and then the Invisible Doors. And the Invisible Doors they're basically these invisible, like invisible ink markers that if you draw with them, you can only see with the black light. And so I've drawn hundreds around New York City, on subways, on walls and parks, on benches that are there that you can't see because you only can see them in the black light. And I have a very sort of in-depth list of where they are that are very, and by in-depth, I mean that I don't even know specifically where they are, because when I draw them, I try to take at least 10 minutes where I've walked away from it, and then I try to remember everything about the surrounding area where I drew the door. And then that becomes sort of the instruction on how to get to it. I've found a few. I've refound a few, which I think is really interesting. But there are 3 mother ships that exist that are more ornate, because the ones that are tagged throughout the city, because I have to do it pretty quickly or I'll get caught. Even though if I get caught, there's no proof that I've done anything. But I just draw like a tiny little square and then a little knob, so they're very simple, and they're just geometric. But there's 3 ornate ones in existence. One here in my apartment, in my kitchen, one in my grandmother's house in Puerto Rico, and then the third one is at a now defunct space in the Lower East Side in the Bowery called Dispersed Holdings, which was the location of Eva Hesse's old apartment. And I was invited to be part of a show there, so I did one of the doors there, and it's still there to my knowledge. The one is in my apartment is definitely still here, and the one in my grandmother's house is definitely still there. And I call them, I think it's funny because I've gotten to thinking about them a lot lately, and just sort of my frustration of not being able to get around the city, and
Right.
and the beginnings of this were again, it was part of the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, where I was just like, oh, like if only there was this like magical way to get to her without going on a plane, without having to spend money on a ticket, and I could just like go through this invisible door that has so many different sort of entryways and exits. And that's sort of what that project is about. Sort of this like, always like, those questions like, if you had a superpower, what would it be? I've always wanted just to be able to, what is it called? To like
Teleport.
Teleportation.
Harry Potter.
100%. I would teleport. Because I mean, like, there's just times when you're just like, oh, if only I didn't have to like walk all the way back home or drive there. Just like snap your fingers and go somewhere. And I think it does come from this desperation to sort of stay in contact with people, which I think is funny because we can't do that right now. But let me pull one up. I do have.
Yeah, I think especially now. Do you have it?
Yeah. Okay. With the, oh my god, there's so much sun in here. Yeah, so that's what it looks like
with the black light.
With the black light, and you can it's door sized for sure. So it's it's human door sized, and it's drawn pretty ornately. I think there's another one that might be. Oops.
Where is that one?
That's the one at Dispersed Holdings. So that's the one that's that was part of the show I was in. There isn't another one. There's one more. So
I have two. Was it actually invisible? There wasn't a black light on it as the show was going, or was there?
No, black light is here so that I could photograph it. But in the show, it was just a blank wall.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just the idea of the work being there. And we had a conversation about this concept of an idea being a complete artwork. And you were telling me when we talked preparing for this about something you contributed to a show in Puerto Rico, if you want to talk about that as the concept being the artwork itself.
Yeah, I was invited to be part of a show with Abraham Cruz Villegas in Puerto Rico some like 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where he had prompted the people that he had invited to sort of give material or a prompt or just anything that he would then reinterpret in his piece. And he was in Puerto Rico at the time, I think. So, and we had just met, and he knew that my connections to Puerto Rico, and I think asked me because of that. But so I ended up, there's a park that I grew up around in my family's hometown of Quebradillas that we called, in English we would call it Bottle Park. And it was a man-made park that it was family owned, private land. They had built it themselves, and the structures were made out of clay, but that there was like horses and rhinos and dinosaurs and cages that were all hand built and human sized, that were interactive. You could go climb underground and then somehow like climb a tiny amount of stairs and be inside of the structure, or there were ladders and you can sort of go inside of the tummy of the horse. It was really fantastical. It was like, to this day I've seen nothing like it. The last few times I went to Puerto Rico, it was closed, and I was really sad about it. I think with the storms and everything, I think maybe there was a lot of sort of hazardous activity in the park, so it wasn't open. But my dream is to go back before I die. But for this show, I ended up writing a sort of a personal anecdote, a story about my memory of going to this park as a child, with some images, of the park that we had taken when I was a kid that are in my family album. And I think, and as far as I know, this story and the structure were implemented into the work. But it was the first time that I had experienced, and I think I've taken it with me, which is this ephemerality. The work was the memory. The work was the experience, was my memory of the experience, my having experienced, my having been there as a child and then reconnecting to it as an adult, and trying to remember sort of the different things that I experienced. That was the work. The work was this fragmented sort of re-happening that I had. And I mentioned that, and I talk about that in the prose. And so I think that somehow got implemented into the work, which was really exciting. And it was when I realized that documentation, which I think is a really big, I get called out a lot for not being very good at documenting my work. And I don't know if I'll ever change in that aspect. I do think that there's something kind of wonderful about reimagining work. If a work isn't documented in its original form, well then what is it to be asked to redo it as an idea? And then
that ephemerality is really interesting as part of your practice.
And then have the permission to reinvent it or to try to remember it as it was. But it'll probably, but it'll be different because as far as I know and as far as I remember, so I guess a lot of my work does to be seen in person when it's happening. Otherwise, you wouldn't know that it happened. And then if somebody asked me to do it again, it would look different, 100%. It would be itself, but it would be a different version of itself, which is why I do reuse a lot of the same imagery and a lot of the same objects in my work, but sometimes placement is different, or, maybe because I've grown, the work is a little different. I don't believe that things need to stay the same. I don't think that that's true. We always have a different idea of what something was. And the most amazing thing about myths and stories is that they're open to interpretation and that they're open to being rediscovered, and to new translations. So I try to keep pretty honest to that, I think.
And can I ask you, before we get to the questions from the audience, which we already have one waiting here, to talk about the references you have for your work, whether it's other artists. I know you work a lot with literature as well and film.
I think I'm getting a sunburn from this. Do you see that? That's amazing. The references I have, they're really not, they're not set in stone. I think, again, as the years go by, work changes. I think the things that influence me change too, or at least my perception of what they are changes. I would say that plainly, across the board, I would say games like child play, a lot of parks. I'm really, really, really interested in park structures and sort of this idea of sirens.
Of the world we're living in.
Yeah, I really like. I mean, so I can just list things like Zoltar machines. I'm really interested in fortune telling machines. I think they're really cool. Pee-wee's Playhouse has always been children's television, just the pedagogy of it, sort of the simplicity and the accessibility of it. This new video I'm working on does involve a little bit of puppetry, so it's been something I've been watching a lot of.
Would you be able to show us anything of that from your studio?
I have. Let's see. I mean, what I can show you, it's really nothing because all it is it almost doesn't make sense out of context. But I have all these wooden pieces that are getting painted. And then they're going to be put together into these tiny little guys. Let's see, what else do I have? This mango is pretty. She's been part of a lot lately.
I love that. I love that they're all women.
She's a mango, but I kind of set her open so that she could have a mouth. Hi. What else is happening in here? Oh, my lampy. I guess I can. My lampy. Hold on. Do you see lampy?
Yeah.
So what's good about lampy is that lampy turns on again, and then my idea is that we can kind of talk to her a little bit, and then she sort of responds with colors, which is great, you know, because she changes color. But there she is.
This is the technology you used in the installation for Cueva Ventana, that the color changed as the video was going.
Why not reuse things, you know?
Oh yeah, it's great.
So yeah, no, it's
I mean, I don't know, this image of Cueva Ventana stuck in my screen, so we're reusing it. I don't know if everyone else sees that or just me.
Yeah, Cueva Ventana was programmed though, so the lighting was programmed to change in accordance with the video. The lamp is being controlled by me, little control. So it's very like, and to me, this is my interpretation of puppeteering. Is that I'm controlling the color source.
Yeah. I can hear you, but your video froze. Okay, you're back. So we have a question here. This is from an artist I know, Kevy Hanley Byrne, asking about the relationship between chance and translation in your work. It seems like I lost your sound. I can't hear you. Let's see. The issues of technology, and we have this great question. Maybe if you leave the video and come back. Well, we're beholden to technology in these times of social distancing. Well, thank you all who are watching for bearing with us. I think we may have solved this problem. We're waiting for Michelle to reconnect. You know, we're both here in New York and you'd think we have good technology. Okay, you're back?
I'm back. I'm back.
Yes, okay, beautiful. So I don't know if you caught that question.
No.
Let me see if I can bring it back up. It was, can you talk more about the relationship between chance and translation in your work? And that both seem to be powerful. I think it says influences. I don't know if there's more, it's cut off.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think both kind of both aren't mutually exclusive. So chance and translation, translation is dependent upon the person who is translating, and that's per chance. I think translation is it's so up to the person doing the translating, because you're influenced by the metaphors that you understand or by the interpretation that you're getting, and that can be different especially in things like poetry or in really complicated sort of prose that's being translated from one language to another, and to languages that are so different, like Spanish to English, where you have multiple meanings for, you know, one word in Spanish, and there's only really one word for everything in English. I love you in Spanish, and they all mean different things, and it's beautiful. But in English, we only have I love you, or I like you, or I adore you, and they're so vastly different, and they're so specific. Where in Spanish, you can have, you know, te quiero, te amo. They have different degrees of emotion, and that's that's the chance of that is up to the person doing the translating, and you would hope that you would get somebody really in tune with the person who's done the original writing, which is I think a hard match to make. You know, I think It takes really, really good translations are made by people who are really, really, really researched and well informed on like the person who did the writing, their biography, their lives, you know, and then what you're trying to do is you're becoming an actor of some kind. You're sort of trying to live in that person's mind while you're trying to adjust it to a new language. And the chances of that happening really well are so slim. But it does happen, which is great. And then chance is everything. I think in mythology, which I do take a lot of, if we're talking about like things that I'm inspired by, I love mythology and I love poetry, and I think they sort of live together in the way that they're interpreted. Because I think, I'm really upset. I told you that there's like a little ode to the power of myth in my video, and the intro, when all of the pieces are coming together, that's sort of my ode to the documentary with Bill Moyer that he did in The Power of Myth, where at the beginning all the artifacts are sort of like combining together, and then it's this like beautifully like analog intro to the most amazing documentary series ever. If you guys haven't watched it, please go watch it. There's 8 episodes.
We all have time to kill.
We do have time to kill, but I think that it's not what's interesting, but like I had something written down that I wanted to say, but I don't know where I put it, which is because I was rewatching it before this, just because I wanted to like live in that again. But what he says is, that life with the knowledge of mystery, live life with the knowledge of mystery and your own mystery. And the only places where that happens, where you can where things don't need to have a truth, like a concrete truth, where you're sort of living in the uncertainty of the metaphor, or you're dealing where your interpretation of something is still true, happens mostly in myth and in poetry. And I think that's also, in discovering like yourself and your autobiography and like where you sort of fit into what's happening right now, I think this certainty of things is false. I don't think that it's true. And I think that most things are chance related or interpretive. And that's at least what I believe. So, and those things really only have life in myth and in poetry.
I'm going to read into this question a little more, knowing that the asker of the question is a photographer. If there is an aspect of chance that comes into your work, I know we saw one of those happy mistakes in one of the photographs from the dark room, but also in technology, you use like Google Translate. If there are any other specific instances you want to talk about.
Yeah, the structures I use are pretty planned out, but as far as making things go, a lot of it is left up to chance. I have no control really over what a lot of things end up doing, which I embrace, and I like. I come across a lot of the objects that I use in my work by chance. I'm not knowingly looking for them. They sort of come across, I'll take a walk and walk by something, and it'll remind me of something else, and then that's the chance, that situation. Or again with the invisible doors and finding them again, that's by chance, but it's almost purposely done, because I've not given myself, I purposely wait 10 minutes of walking away from what I've done to record where I've done it, and to sort of try to remember everything about the space that I can. It's inviting chance. It's invited to sort of find these things again, but in a way that's really organic and still magical. Like the fun of it is that I don't really know where they are anymore, and that if one, there's all these stories about people doing things in their childhood and then sort of going back to them as adults and sort of remembering a space, like deja vu, like, I've been here before, or like, why is this place so familiar? And then, all these stories of like buried treasure, things like that, the magic and the mystery of that are the most are the most honest parts of it. And I don't know, I guess it's almost weird to say that I try to create chance on purpose, but
I mean, it does make sense with your work, though. So we have just a few minutes left. I don't know if there are any other questions from our audience that might come in. If there was anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't, maybe.
Oh no, I totally got sunburnt though. Look, I think I sat in the wrong place in my studio. No, I think we covered a lot. Yeah. I like that the cave image is still right next to you.
Yeah, it was stuck there. I couldn't get rid of it, but it's a memory that's here for our conversation.
Again, it happened by chance.
There you go. So if we don't have any more questions, I think we can wrap up. So this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us for this series of studio visits. And everyone can find Michelle on Instagram and follow her and see where her work is going. We do have another question, actually. So we don't need to wrap up just yet. We have about 5 minutes left. Can you talk about intermedia translations? That's a question from Sylvia Alankar.
Intermedia translations. So what we're talking about is basically the idea that the digital can speak to the analog, or, translations of that kind, right?
Sure. Go ahead.
Intermedia translations. I mean, so basically, I think what I think of it, at least, is that, so, I mean, we do it all the time, right? So if you take a material, I guess artists are always mediating, right? They're always translating. They're always taking one form and making it into another. And I think just being hyper aware of that and it being sort of a concept in the work, it displays itself in sort of a really intentional mediation. That's basically, so that actually that happens and most of the time that mediation happens in the dark room. So the mediation I'm doing is happening with a very digital form being or a really analog form being interrupted by a very digital form. And it also happens, in terms of, I mean, if we're talking about mediation and translation, it's still, what's sculpture? What's, I'm not actually building anything. I'm mostly just placing things in really, really specific order. And then sort of interrupting it with something like light or a story, or, so when a sculpture lives on its own, it's a sculpture, but then as soon as you write a story that sort of, attends to it, it becomes a stage, sort of that kind of trend. So there's I think there's small ways that sort of symbolically change something else. If you add words to something, does it become a story? And then, if you take something away from it, what is it? So if I think at the very beginning of a lot of my work, the camera was a focal point as a tool, and the camera, if I dissect a camera, it's reflection, it's time, it's and all these things can be taken apart and then interpreted individually, and then when it's put back together, if I just use them as a different definition of it in itself, then I can use something that has light in it, and I can use something that has time-related issues in it, or I can use something that, and then if it's living outside of a camera, is it still a camera? And it is, I think, in some ways. Taking something apart that has really specific functions, even if it no longer works as it was originally supposed to work, I think it's still a camera. Does that make any sense? Or did I just make a bigger story?